Hey everyone, I've heard that some students need a little bit more help on this 2.1 assignment using scientific methods in real life. In class, we've gone over a lot of what's in here. You can, if you need some help getting the explanations, the actual reasoning, column C here, over here, you can watch the explanations here. Other folks have said the testable questions are more difficult for them, so let's go through the testable questions right now. Good experimental design involves a few important components. The most important place to start after observing a phenomenon is to write a testable question about why something happens or how one thing affects another. A testable question is one that includes specific information. Specific manipulated or independent variables, which is something the scientist changes before the experiment, and specific responding variables, something that the scientist measures or observes during or after the experiment. So manipulated, independent, that's before the experiment, and something that you measure during or after the experiment. Can dogs understand French? Well, we don't know what's meant by understand. And we don't even really know, is it regular French? Is it a dialect of French? It is a testable question because we know the answer. If you go to France, I'm guessing most of those dogs understand their owners. When they say sit, they sit. Whether they're saying it in French or Mongolian, or, if you live in Mongolia, the dogs are probably responding to sit in Mongolian. The explanation to make it a testable question is, can dogs understand French dog commands with no hand signals? We'd have to have a way to measure the dog's understanding, and then we'd have to have very specific commands that they were using. The way that question is written, it's not testable. It's not just a very good scientific question to begin with because it's not very specific. Do white candles burn faster than colored candles? Well, I'm just going to make this a better question and say, do white candles burn faster than red candles? Or we could say black and red, or blue and red, or pink and blue. It doesn't really matter, but this is a testable question. I'm going to put a T here for testable because we could get groups of white candles and red candles of the same brand with the same size and burn them for the same amount of time and then measure. Or we could just burn them all the way down and time how long it takes for the candle to burn all the way down so there's no candle left. That's a pretty testable question. It's not super specific, but we made it a little bit better. We added the word red to pick a specific color. Which fertilizer is best for plant growth? Well, as written, I wouldn't say it's very testable because which fertilizer isn't very specific. We could say which fertilizer, comma, Miracle Grow or fish emulsion. Let's call it Neptune fish emulsion because I think it's a specific brand. Neptune fish emulsion. That's a different alternative type of fertilizer made from fish, is best for plant growth. We'd have to define what plant growth was. We could say the height of the plant. We could say how many tomatoes were produced and measure the mass of the tomatoes. Or if they're little tomatoes, we could count them. So we could select 2 fertilizers and then measure plant growth by height or the number of, let's just say the mass of fruit produced. Because tomatoes, remember, are actually a fruit. What's the effect of studying time on test grades? Now, studying time's fairly clear. Test grades is fairly clear. So I would say, we could say the amount of studying time on test grades. This seems pretty testable. We could take 2 groups of students, randomly assigned to which group. We wouldn't say like all the 10th graders and all the 5th graders and then give them the same test. That wouldn't be fair because 10th graders would typically do better because they're older. 2 groups of students from the same grade would be assigned to study extra in a study hall or watch a movie. We'll say fun movie so we know it's not about the subject. And then both take a test. That's a pretty easy way to see if the extra studying would affect their test grade. We'd have to do it a bunch of times to really know, and we'd have to do it with different types of students to make a conclusion, a strong conclusion. But it would be a good way to kind of illustrate to students how studying time is important. Would it be great if we kept the students up all night studying? Probably not, because there's a limit to how much studying time. If you're losing sleep, maybe if you're losing 10 minutes of sleep, it's okay. If you're losing 5 hours of sleep, you probably don't need to study quite that much. This one, I'm going to say, how does changing the shape of a kite affect its ability to fly? It could go either way. If you define what changing the shape means, and you define what ability to fly means. What does ability to fly mean? How high it goes? How much kite string goes out? How are you going to measure ability to fly? And how are you going to talk about the shape of a kite? We could change the question. We could use a delta or the kites that look like this. We could use a delta kite, fly, delta kite versus a stunt kite. Stunt kites are shaped kind of more like a diamond. And see how high it flies by measuring kite string pulled out. Be a little bit hard, but if we made the question better, it would be testable. As written, not so much. What makes something sink or float? Now we can figure that out, but as written, this is not testable. We'd have to compare one object to the other. We'd have to say what we were going to measure. Does not say what we are going to measure. The way you would do that experiment, if you were going to find it, wrote a better question, is figuring out how much mass an object has for the space it takes up. And that gives you density. And if the density is below the density of water, you float. If you're more dense than water, you sink. But that's an untestable question the way it's written. Are all humans, that's a lot of humans, we're at about, 7 billion going on 8, connected by 6 degrees of separation? Do you have the resource to test that all 7 billion humans are connected by 6 degrees of separation? That sample size is way too big. So I'm going to say untestable. All humans is too big a sample size. You could test like 2 people, but that wouldn't really help you figure out if that's not a good sample size to generalize to 7 billion. Does taking herbal supplements help a person think faster? Now here's my 2 problems. Herbal supplements. What do you mean? There's lots of different herbal supplements you could take to try to help you think faster. Caffeine? Is caffeine an herbal supplement? Lots of people drink coffee or tea, and that does help you think a little bit faster in some respects. And what does think faster mean? Do your multiplication problems faster? That's more an aspect of memorization, how much time you've spent memorizing your multiplication tables. Does it help you do, like, what does think faster mean? You'd have to have a very specific context or a very specific way you wanted people to think faster, whether it's math or write better or say the alphabet faster or have a way, but right now, the way it's written, it's untestable. Needs more definition of herbal supplement and think faster. I hope that makes sense to everybody. You have to have a really well-defined question in order for it to be testable. Even the ones that were pretty okay for testing, we had to make a little bit better. Like this one, we added Miracle Grow versus fish emulsion to make it more specific. And then we defined plant growth as either height or massive fruit produced. Studying time, we defined a very particular way of studying. We're having a study hall. And then we also had test grades is pretty clear. Can dogs understand French? We had to add with no hand signals. Because most dogs just, like, if you go sit and then you go like this, they're looking for your fist. They don't really care what you say. They're looking for your hand signals. But if you don't have a hand signal, they might understand your voice. Dogs in the US who were trained on English probably won't, but it depends on what country the dog is from, and it depends on, how you've trained them. You could test it, but you'd have to have some really clear boundaries on what you meant by different terms. So that's Testable Questions. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you need more help. Thanks. This is Dr. B signing off.